Hey everybody, I have the strange pleasure of being able to introduce myself. I jumped in to sub for somebody who unfortunately got sick, and since I generally like talking, then I said that I would give a talk as well, and I hope that you like it. So, oh no, I do not want any Lenovo companions happening right now. Okay, so my name is Alex. I'll introduce myself in just a little bit, and I want to talk to you about how to stop hating UI tests. I am pleased that there are some people here, which either means that you hate UI tests, which is understandable because at least two of the talks, well, the last two talks this morning, most especially Lorenzo's the first one, everybody hates UI tests. And we'll get to that. You don't have to, and I hope to bring you out of this room going, actually, they can be good in the right places. That's my aim. So, I am a tester, I'm a test consultant, I'm head of software, I can never get my own title right. I'm head of software quality and test consulting at Bradex. We do software development. I have a test team within the company of awesome testers that do cool stuff with various different tools. We use Jubular. It makes sense because we are the contributors for Jubular, but we also use Selenium and any other tools, and today the talk really is about tool-independent things. So I've got a few examples from Selenium, and the idea is that you can use these things for any tool that you're using on a UI level. Okay, the thing that interests us the most is basically scalable test automation. And you'll see what I mean with that in a second. So, I want to take you on a little journey today. I want to talk about the bad reputation of UI testing. I've got some reasons for that, and I've got some explanations for it. And then I want to talk to you about test structure for UI tests that is good, and how we can do that, and I've got some examples for everybody. Okay. So, I said it at the beginning. Everybody hates UI tests. Is there anyone in the room already that really, really loves their UI tests? No, this makes me sad. I'm really, really passionate about UI tests. I love UI testing. So, let me go on a little bit of a rant. Bear with me, close the door, keep the people inside. I promise we'll come out the other side. So, things I hear, and I've been working with UI testing frameworks for, oh good God, at least 10 years. So I've been hearing this for a long time. UI tests give us such slow feedback. We have to wait for ages and ages. They're much slower than unit tests. We need more infrastructure for them. You need a VM, you need to fire up the UI, you probably need keyboards and all of these kind of things, stuff that I don't need for a unit test, for example. For any of you who know the testing pyramid, unit, service, UI, they're at the top of the pyramid. They're not as important. They're flaky. They always break, and then we don't know why, and people are nodding. Yeah, these are things that we hear, right? Small changes lead to big work. I change a little tiny thing, and then I have to spend ages and ages, or I have to throw it away, and it's all wrong, and I'm spending so much time on my UI tests. Deep breath. Some of my answers to those things. Slow feedback. It's a different level of feedback. I'm going to be the last person in the world who is going to tell you that you should be running UI tests after every commit. That's not what they're there for. The kind of feedback that they're giving us is the kind of feedback that we can wait for, usually until tomorrow morning. Our unit tests and other level tests are there to give us that fast feedback. But for some things, it's worth waiting. I think that's a Guinness thing. But it is worth waiting for the things that we can get from UI tests, and they don't have to be as fast as a unit test. We're not using them for the same kind of information. More infrastructure. I hate to, yes. Sorry, sometimes if you want nice things, you have to do things. It's a fact of life, and yes, they do need some more infrastructure. At the top of the pyramid, this is my favorite one. They're still in the pyramid. Just because it's at the top of the pyramid doesn't mean that they're not important. I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with that testing pyramid anyway, because I find it a little bit too context dependent. I prefer to look at the context of a project, of what makes sense to do on what level. Yes, on a general rule, it is good to have a lot of unit tests. But we need to take context into consideration. And the user focus, I really loved the keynote yesterday because she was bringing us back to what is the value? Who are we doing this for? We are doing this for users. These are the people that pay us. These are the people that hopefully are going to get value from our software. And then we're just like, well, the UI level's at the top of the pyramid. We don't care. That's dangerous on a lot of levels and not just for UI testing. They're flaky. So sometimes yes, but it's often because of bad design or wrong usage. And I'll get to that in a little bit. Small changes lead to big work, and there are two answers to that. The first one is, it's the same for development. We don't get to go to a customer, or at least we shouldn't, and be like, oh, had you only known that you wanted that a week ago? Now I'm gonna have to redo everything. Can you stop coming with your requirements? The same thing for development. We do something, then the customer decides they want it a different way, and we go, oh, fine. So sometimes, if we want new things, we might have to put work into it. And then the second point is only if you design them badly. So, boil it down to 2 points. We have a bit of a tendency to use UI tests to test things that shouldn't be tested via the UI. And that is a really important thing. I understand how this works because I've seen it happen. You do get a customer that is interested in doing UI testing, and then they want to do all of the things via that. And I'm hopefully not going to personally insult too many people, but developers who might not be super excited about writing unit tests go, yay, we don't have to do it. They'll do all of that, but then you find yourself writing the wrong kind of levels of tests via the UI. They're harder to analyze, they're harder to maintain, and they're not giving you the kind of information that you should be getting. So we do not want to be automating all the things via the UI. And then the other thing, they get written badly. They get written, there are various reasons for this. Developers write bad UI tests because they often don't know how to do it properly. That will change as of today. Testers write bad UI tests sometimes because they may not know some of the patterns that would make that sensible. And that will change as of today as well. So the last thing that I ever need is like, if anyone says, you just have to press the record button, stop it. That is like, I'm super passionate about testing and UI testing, and people that do it badly, they make me angry. So don't. Okay, to kind of sum it up and to end my rant, which I feel I've done in a very calm way because nobody has run away. Just because they may be a bit more difficult and a bit slower and not the favorite domain of developers, that doesn't mean that they're not potentially valid. Like I say, sometimes if we want nice things, we have to put work into them, and it's worth doing that in a good way. So, the thing is, the testing tools themselves aren't to blame. They really only think of one thing and one thing only, and I know this 100% because I have been a product owner for a UI testing tool for the last 8 years. All that the tool is ever thinking about is how do I address that component? What is it? Is it a list? Can I select from it? How do I do that? What happens if it's on Mac? Usually everything's different. What happens if it's an infinite list? So those are the things that development teams for UI testing frameworks are dealing with all of the time. How in the heck are we going to make this testable? Or how in the heck are we going to make this executable via our tool? So they have absolutely no support for test design. And that doesn't matter whether you're using Jubular, Selenium, Appium, SWT, but anything. All of them are only ever thinking about, in the way that they do it, how do we get this thing to work, right? So it's not their fault. And the problem is they often help you to make a mess. This is where it gets a little bit bad. So I will quote myself, because it's Wednesday, so why not? Don't use capture replay. A lot of tools offer that. But I can think of a couple of examples where I would say it's okay to put that recording mode on, but only ever to see what the tool thinks you should be doing when you're doing something. Take that test and throw it away. That's never going to be a test. The work that you would have to put in to make a recorded script, anything close to a good test, is just as much, if not more, than writing it from scratch. I have no actual statistics on it, but I feel like I'm believable, so believe me, it's true. Yeah, I've been saying that for a long time, and one day people will listen to me. Maybe today is that day. So what happens when we, either because we're recording something or because we take people who aren't used to how these things are supposed to be structured, we have something like a test case, let's say login, right? So for my test case login, I want to input something, maybe just a username, I want to click something, maybe it's a button, and I want to do a check that when I've clicked the button, it says login successful, right? And I do that in exactly that linear and non-hierarchical fashion. Every single tool offers some kind of API. So you have a tool like Selenium, which has about 4 actions. You have a tool like Jubular that has about 300. You have tools like SWTbot that have somewhere in between, I think, maybe. Every single tool has that kind of API. And the worst thing that you can do is just call things directly from it and say, this is my test. because that means that I end up with redundancies. The next time I need these three things, I'm probably going to end up doing them again. Or I haven't got a slide for it, but copying and pasting, right? Close to capture replay, copy and pasting is the worst thing that you can do. It makes it unreadable, and it means that a team can't work on it. It means that I can't be working on my test case knowing that I'm not doing things the second or third or fourth time that somebody else is doing. It's all bad. So we have no technical or logical layers. We just go straight from this is what I want to do to these are the actual technical steps that I need to do it. So a little bit on how it should be structured. What we want to do is to split these things into abstraction layers. Makes sense. I know there are a lot of developers in the room, so I will go over this quite quickly because it's things that come naturally to you because you think like this. But for tests, it's worth looking at it as well. Functional workflows. What things can I do in my application? Things like logging in or creating a customer. We call them functional atomic actions. The idea is single actions that I can do, like entering a customer name or clicking on a specific button. Or even if I have something like a browse button to get to my address, that would be enter address. It consists of a few different actions within it, but it is one atomic action for the user. You know, it's not just on a click level. And at the bottom level, again, depending on the tool that we're using, we might need some technical keywords, things that we need again and again, like select from this table, or check before that the component is there before you try and do anything with it. Or my favorite example is, does everyone know what a slush bucket is? So you have a list on one side and a list on the other side, and you want to move one thing to another. If you have any concept like that that comes up in your application again and again, completely irrelevant of what it's doing on a logical level, that's going to be a technical keyword, right? Because you don't want to have to redesign that test logic every single time. In a functional sense, you'll have to do it differently depending on the lists. So these things, these functional workflows, we might end up, and I have a few examples of this in a second, they might end up being split into things that are internal, so private. One of the nice things about this is that we can talk, if we're using Java, which we tend to do, if we're talking about visibility, then we can really have rules about what should be visible to other things, right? So we might have internals that are private and services that are public. And the idea is in my test case, I can only call services because I don't want in my test case to be calling a technical keyword directly. I don't want to be calling an atomic action directly. And then we can create contexts, I have a slide on that in a second, that split our application into different, I'm going to say actually domains. So the funny thing about all of this microservices stuff is that we're talking about domain-driven design, and I'm like, testers have been talking about that for years. Welcome to where we've been. So splitting the action into logical, functional units is what we do in this sense as well. And the great thing is, and we notice this in so many teams, regardless of what level you are, what level interests you, you can see what things you might want. So if I have a test manager or a customer, that person possibly only cares if the test case create customer was successful or not successful, and what that means. If I have a tester that's maybe, they know some Java, they work with it, that's fine, but they're not going to be doing the really technical stuff at the bottom. At this level, it's basically just like any DSL. I've got examples for it in a second. And if I've got someone that's a bit more technical or a developer, then they're maybe at this level. And the great thing is that it's kind of fluid, right? If I'm even more interested about these levels, then I kind of drill down and go and see, oh, okay, it's doing that. Oh, that's interesting. I can use that again somewhere else, or I need to change that. So, some examples. Technical keyword. I've got the keyword replace text. That's something that if you use, I think, SWTbot or Jubular, that's something that comes with the tool. But if you use Selenium, you have to write your own. So I would need to click, select all, and then send the keys. That is a technical action that I will need again and again. An atomic action might be something like enter customer name, right? It reuses that technical action, and I'm going to use this action just to enter the customer name. At this point, when we're talking about mapping to the actual UI component, the UI component is fixed here. We know always which one this is going to be. A workflow might be to create a new customer. It reuses enter customer name. It also gives the address and the postcode. Oops. And the test case will have everything that we need. And I'll talk about test case structure in just a second as well. So I get to where I need to be. I check that the customer does not exist. I will get to why this is important later. I do the thing I want to do, I save it, and then I check that the customer does exist. I said about contexts or domains or whatever you like to call them. If you've worked at all with Selenium, this is going to look quite similar to page objects, but it's not entirely the same thing. So the idea is, if I have an area of my application that is for master data or for admin or for settings, those go in separate contexts. The idea is, I always know where to look for the actions. So if I have enter customer, and that's my customer area is in context 1, which is yellow, I know where to look to find the actions and the workflows for that thing. Sorry. If I don't find it, I can create it. But the likelihood that I will be doing something redundantly because it's actually over there is minimized. It's never gone. We are always going to have redundancies. But putting things in good structured places helps us to minimize that. It also means that I have got more chance of working together with other testers without coming into horrible merge conflicts because everybody is trying to work on the same thing at the same time. So we split these workflows and actions into contexts. Like I say, in microservices terms, everyone's like, yeah, that makes sense. And I say, we've been doing that for years. Okay. So I said again, it's quite similar. Who's heard of the page object pattern approach? I don't know how I'm doing this. Okay, cool. So a few people have heard of it. It's very similar to that. The difference is that it's where page object pattern says that we have services, which are public, and actions, which are private. This has got a few more layers. So we've got internal and external, we've got the atomic actions, and we've got technical keywords as well. If you really go down into it a great deal, there are some differences about where we'd say you should put things or not put things, but those are details. The other thing that's a difference is that the page object pattern really focuses on the page of a website, whereas we prefer to focus on an actual functional context. The context might go over 2 pages, or it might be on part of a page. So the page isn't necessarily the logical unit. It's a difference. And if anybody knows, so I know that at least one person does, Gojko Ajic. He's a really, really cool tester who lives in Great Britain. He has a thing about 3 layers for UI testing, very similar idea, and we've got a few more layers. So the idea is we've not reinvented the wheel. This is based on things that we know, but we try and adapt it to the context that we've seen so that it makes more sense. Let's have a look at a bad example. I don't know how I'm doing this, but is it my cheat? No, I don't think it is. Shall I switch? I'll switch to the other microphone. Yeah. Okay. You can just turn it off. Yeah, that's fine. There we go. Okay. Okay. I really hate working with these things, but okay. At least it's not making funny noises. So, bad example 1. We have something that says delete customer. The first question I have is, what is that? Is that a test case? Is that a workflow? No idea. If I look inside it, it's full of, this is a Selenium example, it's full of all kinds of direct technical information. It's got things in there that if I need to find that element again later, I'm probably going to copy and paste that if I don't do something sensible with it. And then when that element changes, I'm going to have to go through all of the places in my test. You know what I was saying at the beginning about one small change makes me have to do a lot of work? These are the examples for, yes, if you do it badly, right? So this is an awful example. We don't like it. Has no abstraction levels. We've got redundant object location, and it is a reasonably high level, but all of those operations are technical, right? This should be a technical keyword, or at least parts of it should be. I have a real life bad example that I have permission to use. So it says login, which is good. We're finding elements within the login. I wouldn't usually put them there. I would usually put the element location externally to that as a class within my context. But, you know, okay, for now, that's fine. We're doing things. And then suddenly, why are we clicking on file upload? This has nothing to do with login anymore. So just because I can write something that says it does login doesn't mean I'm actually doing it. So even if we start with good intentions, we can sometimes end up making things do things that they shouldn't be. So bad examples. Okay, it's time for everybody to wake up before lunch. So This is an example of a test case, and we have a name for it. So it's customer TC 010103, whatever, create customer. We've got check customer exists. Oh, I have a little pointy thing. Wait a second. Hey. Check customer exists, create customer, check customer exists, and the customer exists is, well, this is part of the problem, right? One of them is definitely false here, but I'm not quite sure. The things that I hate about this are, first of all, sleeps. Sleeping is bad. No, sleeping is really, really good, but in terms of programming, sleeping is bad. Most frameworks offer dynamic waits. Use them. I'm never going to say that it's always possible to get rid of all of your sleeps. Sometimes it's necessary, but even in the cases where it seems to be necessary, I would ask myself and the development team if this isn't a testability issue. Because if I haven't got something that I can actively wait for, then how does my user know as well, right? How does my user know that it's finished if the only way that I know is that suddenly I can click again, or I don't have the beach ball of death or whatever? The other thing I don't like is that we've got redundant data, right? That's a bad thing too. So it's definitely workflows. It's that high level that we were talking about, but it's got some horrible things in between. So this looks a lot better. Check customer exists. We've got a data object for the customer, so we're pulling it always from the same place. False, and then after we've created the customer, true. That's better. Clear levels, that is something, so I can program somewhat in Java, not a great deal. All of the testers on my team, so about half of the testers on my team come from things like biology, chemistry, things where you don't necessarily learn programming, and every single one of them, most definitely at this level, and funnily and excitingly enough, getting lower and lower and lower, this is fine. This is entirely readable. This is cool. And we have here also, I'm going to get to it later, a VAV pattern. We call it verify, act, verify, and I'll talk about it in a second. So let's break down that a little bit more. The public workflow that we just had was create customer. We can talk about this later. One of the things that Java developers really go a bit woo about is really static methods. Yes, it turns out that the way that we write Java code for writing tests isn't necessarily the same kind of Java code that we will write for code. It's fine to use static methods here. We are doing nothing, absolute sod all with objects. We're not changing things, we're just shipping things, here, do that. So it's fine. It has the added advantage that it makes it even easier for people who aren't really in on object orientation to learn, but that's just an added example. So, create customer. I'm going to lose my bracelet. Let's take that off. Create customer has various things in it. We open the menu, open a submenu, fill in a customer form, click save, and then go back to the main view. This fill in customer form is an internal workflow. That's something that's going to come up again and again. It makes sense to have it, but it's nothing that I can say as a service. That's nothing I can call and say this is a thing that I'm going to do all of the time like that. So that's got some sets in there, name, surname, street, and other things. We go even further down. I said before, it's nice to have your object recognition separate so that it's not in every single thing. This is an example of that. And then we have, again, these are our atomic actions, the lowest level that is a logical level. So I know, I'm not super happy about the word set in this, but I can deal with it. So I'm putting in my street, and all of that reuses a replace text, and that's a technical action, because that replace text, I have an example for it in a second, does what we said it does at the beginning. So click somewhere, wait for something, enter a text, get rid of the text that was in there before, and things like that. So if we look at different tools, this is all of that. Those are examples that came from someone on my team who was working on a project that happens to use Jubilar. But at that point, it's regardless. It would be exactly the same if we were using Selenium or SWTbot or anything else. That level it's independent of the tool. The part where it gets interesting with the tool is at this technical level. So if I want to select something from a table in Selenium, this example especially for this slide, this might be the things I need to do. I can't even tell if that works because that's not the level of code that I am writing. But that's fine because I can have a discussion with a developer or somebody who's going to write that code to say, I need a method that I can give these parameters to, and it will do that. And I need it to be able to deal with this, this, and this. I know that from a test perspective because I've been automating tests for about 10 years. the fact that somebody else does the writing, that we pair on it, is actually a really nice thing to be talking about, because then we might figure out, oh, this table isn't particularly testable. Why doesn't it have an ID? And all of these nice things that we find out when we talk to each other. If we look, if we look at the same kind of example from Jubiler, because I know it the best, that will actually just use the action that Jubiler brings for it, because we have that. Why not? SWT might have one as well. This is the level where things start to get different, but that's such a deep level. I'm not saying that you can switch out your automation framework every other day. I know that it's this really nice idea in terms of development to be able to switch everything that's underlying out. In 11 years of working in the IT industry, I've never seen it happen. So that's I've just, shock me, that's fine, but it's more about the layers and how the layers are sensible. So a couple more patterns that we talk about. I mentioned VAV, verify, act, verify. Who has ever had a test that has passed, but then you do exactly the same thing in the interface and you notice that it didn't work? Oh, come on, don't lie. Thanks, Tobias. Those kind of things happen if I don't check after I've done something. So I create a customer, I click on save, and then I'm like, okay, all of the test steps themselves, the actions were fine. The fact that after save, an error dialog comes saying, yeah, that didn't work. Yeah, if I don't try and check it afterwards, I will not know. Checking things beforehand is also a good idea too. So if I have something that shouldn't be there, and then I want to create it and it should be there, or the other way around for deletion, do those checks on both sides, because it makes your tests easier to understand later when they've gone wrong, and you won't run into some rather embarrassing, entirely, that they happen to the best of us, but it's still kind of embarrassing. We won't run into those errors. So this is the kind of structure that we like. Check that the customer doesn't exist, create it, and then check that the customer does exist. What is in those checks, that might be, this is the great and exciting thing about UI automation. What cues do I need to know that it worked? Sure, I can go and check in the database. Maybe you want to do that too. My question to that is the customer going to check directly in the database? Because the customer might want to know via the UI if I can search for the customer. That might be something I want to do. Okay, data objects. I talked about them before. So each atomic action references that functional data set that it's going to need. The idea being that we only need to have data once, and we can avoid things like this where I don't even know what true, false, false means. And if I change street in one, then I have to change it everywhere else. So we had this example before. I can go and find that. I can change it. I can see where it's used. I can do all of the exciting things that I want to do, and I'm not doing duplicate data. So one thing that's really, really useful that we've noticed that we like using is if you have, when we're dealing with UIs, we are usually dealing with some kind of forms, right? I've got all of these things I need to fill out to do my customer data, or all of these things I need to fill out for my search query. And sometimes I want to fill out all of the things, and sometimes I want to fill out just some of the things, which makes it interesting for my workflows. How am I going to build them? Do I need separate workflows for each one? Nice little trick is in things like your replace text or in your technical actions. I have a funny story about this in a second, is to do something like, if the input isn't null, so we allow, if you put null in this, then it will literally just skip the step. So you can have the same workflow going through, and depending on where I put null in as a data type, it will just skip it. So I can use exactly the same workflow to do all of the things, to do some of the things, to do just one of the things, or none of the things, and I can reuse it again and again. Funny side fact, one of the things that I love doing most is getting testers and developers to work closer together. And this example, it's still wrong in this slide. We had a developer come to us and he was like, the really nice story is it's the same guy that wrote the bad login example before. And he was like, I'd really like to talk to your tester, because why am I waiting for something if I'm only then going to check whether I need it at all? Perfect. We are all learning from each other. This is lovely. This is what tests should do. They should help us to understand our software and each other maybe a little bit more. Okay. I've given you some examples, and I would love to tell you that this works all the time, like perfect unicorn rainbow poop, because it's the only way of doing things and it's perfect. That is not how I see things. That's not how we see things. Everything is context dependent. So in the contexts where we have used these things so far, it has worked well, it has been useful for us, and it's saved us a lot of time, and it saved us a lot of arguments and hair pulling out and shouting at each other. That doesn't mean 100% that will always be the case for your projects, but we like, maybe there are things that you can expand on. Maybe there are things that you say, this doesn't make sense for us, but hey, thanks, Alex, that gave me a good idea for something else. So, I want you to take away 3 things. I want you to take away that you do not have to hate your UI tests. Give them some love, both in the sense of just love them, and also put the work into them, do them right, use them for the right things, and they will give you what you want. Basically, they just want to be loved. Don't reinvent the wheel completely. All of the things that I've shown you are based on, developers like, sure, abstraction levels, we know. I've given this talk a few times. I will stop saying the things that are apparently so obvious when they've become so obvious that everyone is actually doing them. Then I promise I will stop doing this talk. Until then, keep telling me that you know it, but do it. Seriously. Reevaluate things for new context. Context is a killer. It's always the most important thing. I'm one of the people that don't like to talk about best practices. I like to talk about good practices because that can change. That can change depending on the context that we're in. And the really, really nice thing is that developers and testers can learn from this and work with this. Regardless of what kind of a background you have as a tester, I would say a good tester, whether they write tons of program code or not, should be able to think abstractly and logically. That is a personal belief that I have. And if you can do that, then you can work with this. And you have people actually collaborating, working together, talking to each other, finding where the application isn't testable, finding things that are bugs before we even get to the automated test, and all of the lovely, lovely things that happen when people actually speak to each other, which I've heard is a good thing to do in teams. We've seen some fascinating effects coming out from this. People really working closer together, our test team getting code reviews for their tests off developers, but also developers trusting testers more to be like, hey, can you come and talk about this with me? It's a good thing that goes way beyond just test automation. Have I convinced you? Are you all going to try a little bit harder on your UI tests to give them some love? I really hope so. It's worth doing it because they do have an awful, awful reputation, and it is because we use them for the wrong things and we do them badly. And that pains me because I have seen it work in different ways. So don't forget to evaluate. My personal thing is if you didn't like it for whatever reason, if you're going to give a -1 or a 0, tell me why, because otherwise I can't change anything. I can just be sad. If you want to make me sad, that's fine. Yeah, if I'm around here all day, I'm here around tomorrow, so if there are questions after the time when question is up, then you can find me for that. And with that, I'm done. Thank you.